In security matters, the Obama administration doubles down on Silicon Valley. Defense Secretary Ash Carter just announced the FlexTech Alliance. It's a public-private manufacturing consortium based in San Jose, California. The goal is to secure U.S. leadership in next-generation bendable and wearable electronic devices. It was Carter's second tour through Silicon Valley in 4 months. For more, I'm joined by Dave Gwyn, Vice President of Nutanix Federal. Dave, the FlexTech Alliance is part of a larger trend. Here's how Federal News Radio puts it. Carter characterized DoD's new investment as emblematic of its aspirations to rejuvenate a relationship the military once enjoyed with the U.S. high-tech sector, when defense investments in technologies like microprocessors, GPS, and network technology eventually became foundational elements of commercial IT. Now, your parent company is based in San Jose. How does Silicon Valley view all this attention from the Department of Defense?
Right, so my company, Nutanix, is one of the companies that we're trying to get out here. We started 3 years ago in trying to penetrate the federal government and get sort of brand awareness, which is very important. There's a natural human inclination to go with the status quo, to stick with names that are known, and if you bought it a couple years ago, then certainly it's okay to buy it again now.
That's right, you're right.
And so that sort of stands in the way of innovation. If you think about the most innovative companies that we all know these days, they're names that a couple years ago you might not have even thought of. The security requirements now more than ever, with everything that's gone on over the last year or two in terms of breaches and the like, are very real and very necessary. But the fact is that a Silicon Valley company will frequently come out and add federal government as a targeted sales territory, maybe 3-4 years into their existence, and thus have to bolt on those security requirements. And it's important to get to these companies when they're young and when they're able enough and agile enough to build the security into the product so that it's ready for the federal government's consumption from the earliest stages of that innovation.
Yeah, we hear you. You've got to break habits once in a while. Now,
right.
This will be a pivotal year for federal IT. FTARA, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, could pave the way for more modern systems. But there are plenty of hurdles built into the procurement process itself. You wrote an op-ed about this topic in FCW last month. I'd like to read an excerpt. Although requests for information and proposals should be the starting point for that transformation, they've become a shelter for the status quo, a place where innovation goes to die. Pretty strong words, Dave.
Yeah, and I stand by those words. It's an important thing that we need to consider. FTARA was a great step, right? FTARA is the evolution of what had been an initiative, the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative. That was sort of a nice to have. FTARA put that into law, and now each agency is required to have a CIO who has financial control, financial accountability, and who is somewhat on the hook to Congress to show progress in data center consolidation and increased efficiency in terms of how their IT operations are run. The problem is that the status quo, the names that we've all been seeing for the last 10, 15 years, that everybody would recognize, the people from whom we buy our storage, we buy our networks, we buy our servers, they're not willing to just give up their positions easily. And that 75% of the IT budget that's going to that maintenance is not something they want to walk away from. So you can go to the RFIs and the RFPs, put in certain key words that sort of subtly but very clearly direct acquisitions to only be awardable to the status quo, and the next thing you know, someone who wanted to innovate is unable to because they've inadvertently built in a requirement that locks them into the old way of doing things.
Right. Well, let's take a step back for a look at the big picture. The FlexTech Alliance is one of 15 public-private manufacturing hubs across the country. The Obama administration wants that figure to triple over the next decade. Are these types of hubs necessary? Because it's impossible to change the procurement process from the inside.
I think they're very important. I think the good faith intent of them is also very important, but we have to just remember that it's human nature that's at work here, right? We can make laws like FTARA all day long, but people don't change based on something that's written. They change behaviorally. And so how does one change the fact that humans tend towards names that they recognize? Make the new names recognizable. So by bringing the federal government to these innovation centers, people get exposure to these young companies that have great ideas that can easily replace the status quo and the old way of doing things, and therefore are more comfortable picking them. The other thing I mentioned in that article that you mentioned was that we need to fund the federally funded research and development corporations, the FFRDCs, give them money up front in order to do testing that proves that legacy applications can run on the newer technologies. And that way, I think the acquisition folks will feel more comfortable picking the new names because there's not risk that their initiative will fail. They know in advance that it'll work on the new technologies.
It's good to hear your points of view. Dave Gwyn, Vice President, Nutanix Federal, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.